Dracula 2000 first came to my attention via Andrew Rona and Richard Potter back during the editing of Scream. They had mentioned at the time that they had long wanted to do sort of a new version of Dracula 1972. The Hammer movie with Christopher Lee in the present day. You know, at the time they were saying, well, we're gonna get Robert De Niro to play Dracula and Martin Scorsese is just gonna direct it. And I was like, oh yeah, well, good for you. Great. You guys, do that. So, cut to a few years later, we've had the first success with Scream, then Scream 2, and then they were like, well, why don't you and Joel Soisson, who is the producer of the Prophecy movies and writer of many of them, come up with an idea for Dracula 2000. They just gave us the title. They had nothing else. Joel and I kicked around a story concept that was ultimately about the fact that Van Helsing had been hiding Dracula's body because he couldn't kill it, and he was living off of Dracula's blood. And some thieves come in to steal Dracula's body because they want to sell immortality. The original concept was the thieves knew exactly what they were stealing. We showed that to, that extended treatment to Wes Craven. Wes came on board. I think the first check written on the movie was to Wes for his presentation and producing duties.
Dracula. Not myth, nor ravings of a mad Irish novelist. Oh, no. He's real, I assure you. They can be killed by silver, by sunlight, by stakes. You must pierce their heart or behead them. They are Nosferatu, vampires.
And you knew this? And you're all right with this?
I had them destroyed, eradicated. All but one. My secret in the Abbey.
Very, very lucky on this film to work with Joel Soisson, who's not only a great writer but a wonderful producer and just an amazing human. And I adore Joel. And when he and I started kicking around the idea of Dracula, how to make it different, how to put our own sort of thumbprint on one of the most filmed characters in cinematic history. We talked about Dracula, a lot of the lore. We both researched tons of vampire lore, not just the book, Bram Stoker's book, which we reread very closely and talked a lot about. And of course, Dracula is only really in the beginning of the book and then at the end of the book, and his whole motivation at the end is, who are you to, and I'm paraphrasing, who are you to demand why I'm doing what I'm doing? You don't get to know. And then they kill him. And it's just like, okay, well, I think that's a lot of why the character has continued so well. Stoker basically left it up to whoever wanted to jump on the Dracula train to determine your own version, because he didn't dictate where he was from. He didn't dictate all the gory details of his past, and that was something, that got us down the road of the simple question, well, if you're Dracula, you can't come out in the daylight. What is your last sunset? And then why are you afraid of the cross? Why are you afraid of all these religious things? Why? And then we thought, well, what would be the most significant sunset for you to have issues with the crucifix and all that other stuff? Well, it would be the crucifixion. Let's go back to the first one. Who would have that have the most emotional impact on? And then that led us to Judas. And Joel and I was raised Catholic, but was certainly not practicing. And Joel is avidly not. But we're both huge fans of Jesus Christ Superstar. Because Jesus Christ Superstar, I think Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice basically said it was the gospel according to Judas. And Judas in that musical is the most interesting character. He's really, in so much of the mythology of, or the fact, depending on how you like to word things, is the most interesting part of the Jesus story because he is the best friend who betrays him. And so we started thinking about that and what that punishment would be, and the idea that, you know, there's this whole thing of the wandering Jew mythology, which is basically has a version of, you know, it's Judas who is sentenced to wander the earth forever because of his accepting of the 30 coins of silver. And then we thought, oh, there's this whole thing of silver, which I think isn't even in the original Stoker book, but has become part of the vampiric lore, largely due to films and werewolves and stuff like that, and their cross-pollination. So that started to become really intriguing. We now had a hook that felt really unique. And Van Helsing in our story was like, well, I can't figure out how to kill him. Well, he can't figure out how to kill him for a couple of reasons. One, he hasn't tried hanging him, which is how Judas was supposed to die. But he's also addicted to his blood, so it's like, well, I don't want to, you know, kill the golden goose, because that never works well for the killer of the golden goose. So it just seemed to ground everything for a place for us to leap off of that gave us a really unique version of the character. And the original opening that we had planned and storyboarded and were going to shoot, and ultimately was cut for budget reasons, was started with the silver coins falling in the sand, and the Judas's feet, you just see his sandals pop into frame, and then you see a shot of this rope breaking, and you follow this, what was going to be a sort of seamless single shot of him walking through time. So it had Judas becoming, you know, walking through, and suddenly he's in, like, you know, the medieval times, and moving from the Middle East and up through Europe, and then you have a moment where he becomes Vlad the Impaler, and then he ends up in the French Peninsula Wars with the English. We teed that up right from frame one. We didn't hide it. We didn't, and I think in a lot of ways that would have been better. I think there are some viewers in the audience, you know, who found that revelation to be something really satisfying the way it happened. I think there are other people who felt that it was like, what the hell, I'm now watching some crazy religious movie. Then that opening ended in what you see in Dracula 2000 as a flashback, which Joel and I, was the original opening of the film, which was, in our mind, a complete homage to the Hammer films, where you see Dracula on the streets of London, and where Van Helsing catches him with the mirror trap. Wes always loved that. You know, Wes Craven, he really supported the whole Judas angle. Dimension Films began to have real concerns about it, and started making us cut a bunch of those elements out. And I think that, you know, it's the death of a thousand cuts things. You make one little change, one little change, one little change, one little change. Suddenly it's no longer looks like what it started out to be. And that was certainly the case with this between April and July, or April and the end of June when we started. We started shooting June 21st when we released December 22nd of the same year. So there was, you know, the way those changes happened, that Joel and I, even when the other writers came in, Joel and I would keep having to rewrite what they did in order to make it fit in the world that we had.
Now you know. No, you judge me as you see fit. But right now, we must stop him before he gets what he came for.
But he's here by accident. The crash.
No! No! He is not here by accident.
Joel and I were very eager in the writing of it to make sure that it wasn't just, we weren't hanging everything on the one character. And because our original version had started with these group of thieves who steal Dracula, who all then succumb to his charm, we had created all these other characters. We also had created, you know, Van Helsing and his protege, Simon, who were going to try and get him back. Ultimately, as the characters changed and everything like that, you know, we were still casting everybody along the way, and we We auditioned so many different people for every single part. Obviously, we cast Vitamin C, Colleen Fitzpatrick, to play Lucy. She was really charming and had that sort of girl next door who is very flirty vibe about her. It also helped that my son Devin at the time was a huge fan of Vitamin C, so it's like, if we can put Vitamin C in the movie, let's do it. Jerry Ryan at the time was in Voyager and getting all sorts of raves and notice for that. Jennifer Esposito read in the first couple of days of auditions. You know, we did auditions for months, and she was one of the first ones who read for Selena. And we kept coming back to her as somebody who we wanted for that part. Omar Epps, we didn't get till very late. We originally had cast somebody else in his role, and then Dimension realized that they had a pair play deal with Omar. If they didn't act on it, they would have to pay him and not have him in something. Omar came in and was great, and I've worked with Omar a couple of times, and he was really fun in that. I think he has a really good time in it.
The skulls are to scare us. The crosses, the coffin, all of it. It's a grand spanking mind fuck to scare off thieves. If you make a killing, why hide it in a safe?
When you can hide it in a coffin.
This look like an old wood box to you guys? The Holy Grail, the Golden Fleece, the crown fucking jewels, whatever it is, it's inside.
We had talked about a few different people for Van Helsing. You know, our top three was probably Christopher Plummer, Christopher Walken, and Alan Rickman at the time. And Chris being Canadian, and we were going to shoot in Toronto and New Orleans. It made a lot of sense to go with Chris, and Chris was wonderful. He loved playing the part. He was a huge fan of Stoker and the whole, you know, Stoker and Henry Irving. Henry Irving was the theater manager that Stoker did a lot of work for, and supposedly was a real tyrant. And some of the, you know, the lore is that a lot of Dracula is based on Henry Irving. So the old look that Van Helsing has in the flashbacks is Henry Irving. That's what Chris wanted to go for. And Chris is a pro. He knows where the camera is at every single moment. He knows how to find the light. He knows that, you know, you work with people like that, it's an amazing thing. And he was great with the younger cast who were all sort of in awe of him. He would tell amazing stories about all these other crazy movies he'd done. None about Sound of Music. He would not talk about that unless you were a fan. Fans come up to him on the street, talk about Sound of Music, he'd talk about Sound of Music. You're working with him, you don't bring it up.
Simon, look, some of my holdings were acquired in a manner not quite befitting the scrutiny of the law. You understand what I mean?
Where are you going?
Well, I must tend to this matter myself. And in my absence, I will need you to run the business.
Matthew, what did they take?
Johnny Lee Miller, who we had as Simon, was always like in our top 5 choices if we could get him. Johnny's a guy who has no interest in fame. You know, I think he's now a firefighter in New York after Elementary. Johnny Lee Miller, in the original version, his character was the protege vampire hunter. He shows up with this, you know, in the movie he shows up with a crossbow. In the original version, he shows up with like a Grecian urn. As he shows it to Van Helsing, he smashes it on the desk, and inside is a vampire's head. And you know, this was how we met him. That's the part that Johnny Lee Miller signed on to play. He read that, he was offered that, that's the part he said yes to. And then suddenly he shows up and he gets this new version of the script where he is basically an antiques dealer, where he's a guy who knows nothing, but sells antiques. You know, the line that he says in the movie, never ever fuck with an antiques dealer, was a joke that he used to say on set. And Joel and I were like, well, we have to have him say that. We have to write that in, because that's just so ludicrous and part of what the process has been in making this movie, and is a complete pro, and was just a guy who physically can do anything you ask him. Like, he's, you know, a martial artist and just capable as all get out, and really good to work with. He had signed on to be this protege vampire hunter character, and he showed up to play, the antique dealer. And he just looked at me and said, "Look, I don't know what this is anymore, but if you still want me to do it, you tell me what to do and I'll do it." And that's how we move forward. And I always was incredibly grateful for him for sticking it out.
The hell was that?
It's probably just turbulence. Rick! What the hell are you?
When you're making a Dracula movie, the most important thing is who's playing Dracula. And we had, in my initial early conversations with Bob Weinstein, I said, the prototype for Dracula is Brandon Lee. Brandon obviously had died years before on the set of The Crow, but I was like, that's Dracula. And he was like, oh, okay, I totally get the kind of movie you want to make now. So that was always in our minds as we went forward. We auditioned so many people. And as I said, on the first day of auditioning was Gerard Butler came in, and none of us had heard of him, and he hadn't been a lead in any movie. I think he'd had a supporting role in some Russell McKee mummy movie and a small part in Tomorrow Never Dies. And Jerry's performance was amazing. He really had a lot of weight to it and a lot of just overt charisma. Like he had that Dracula charm that you wanted. And he's, Jerry's like 6'2" and in really good shape. And so he also had he was imposing. So that all those were like, okay, that he's, at the top of our list, but then we couldn't have him because of our schedule and his schedule. And he was like, oh, I'm not sure why I'm here. I'm heading off to Lithuania in a few days. And we're like, well, let's go through and, work it out. And that's what we did. It was interesting. One of the other, probably my second favorite audition for Dracula was Lou Diamond Phillips, who had an amazing read. Jerry got hold of my cell phone number and would keep calling me from Lithuania and just like, oh, have you cast that movie yet? Oh, I should be Dracula. Oh, you know what, that guy be terrible. Oh, it should be me. I keep thinking about this. So he and I became friends just because he would call me at odd times from Lithuania, and through a variety of sort of things and pushing and everything like that, it began to look possible that we might be able to get it. Once we got Jerry, and once Jerry showed up in Toronto, and we started talking more and more about the character, we had, because of the character's longer life than in the book, and because of his sort of malignant feelings about religion, it wasn't that the cross or anything, he was not afraid of those things. He hated those things. So that's a different take than the old, it's the cross. So that was a key thing in the performance. And we, there's the great scene in the film, which was the best thing that Aaron Kruger wrote, was when Johnny Lee Miller holds up the Bible, and Dracula just says, Jerry says, propaganda. That tells you what his sense is.
Now, I drink the blood of your children, but I give them more than just eternal life. I give them what they crave most. All the pleasure you would deny them.
When we looked like we were going to be going to Toronto, because I had met the production designer Carol Spear, who did Mimic, and I had edited Mimic, I remember thinking Carol would be the ideal person to do it, and I was thrilled that she said yes. Carol, I think, did almost all of David Cronenberg's movies until she retired, and just had a great classical sense of not only the world that we were trying to build, but just also a really practical sense of how to give you the most options in shooting. I remember her one request was, please just shoot every set we make. Even if it's just one shot, just shoot it. I don't want to build it and have it thrown out. And it was like, and we did. We never did shoot, and it's something that she made. We were very lucky at the time, and you would never do this now. The film opens with the Demeter at sea, and there was a ship in Lake Ontario, so that's all shot from a helicopter in Lake Ontario with a redressed actual tall sailing ship with crew that is dressed in wardrobe that Denise Cronenberg, David Cronenberg's sister, who was our costume designer, that she designed and showed up, and we shot all that in a helicopter. I mean, you would never do that now. That would all just be a couple of digital shots, but no, sure enough, we went out at sunset and did that. And then the wreck of the Demeter, which you see in the beginning, Carol designed all that, and that was all done at stage. The shot of the wolf prints turning into the human footprints, that was all done on stage, and we just threw a bucket of water to be the lapping, the lapping wave that washes them away. So she was really good at also finding the locations in and around Toronto, because Toronto's an older city in Canada, that we could double for the 1890s for London, which was invaluable for the scope and feel of the movie, especially the hammer opening, which became the hammer flashback in the middle.
You try the shop where she works. I don't. Try to find her house. Oh, God, I only pray she will listen.
You're still her father.
Yeah.
We also shot for 3 weeks in New Orleans, so she did a lot of scouting and matching, Lucy and Mary's house in New Orleans. The ground floor is in New Orleans. The upstairs was a set in Toronto. So when you see, Dracula and Lucy at the bottom of the steps, I don't drink coffee, and she goes up the stairs. She is going up, from New Orleans to Toronto, and she designed that whole look and like sort of colorful walls, and really found that vibe.
So you haven't told me your name.
I have many. But we're all so much more complicated than our names. Yes. Lucy.
We're also really lucky on this film to have an amazing director of photography, Peter Powell, who had shot Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, just before this, and he was color timing that in Toronto while we were shooting. Some people say, oh, well, you do all these sort of acrobatic stunts and stuff in the movie, and those are all sort of a ripoff of The Matrix. No, they're a ripoff of Chinese Ghost Story and Bride with White Hair. And Ronnie Yu directed Bride with White Hair, but Peter Powell was the director of photography on Bride with White Hair. Peter was an amazing ally. We used to call him the dictator of photography because he drove his camera crew and everything, and I think he was a lot gentler than probably he is in Hong Kong when he works there. But he was amazing, and I learned tons from Peter, and we had a fantastic relationship. I used to think of him as my Chinese father. It was a great experience to have him, to have Carol Spear, to have that creative powerhouse to be supportive on the film.
Hi. You know why you never had me, Simon? Huh? 'Cause you Brits like to sweet talk and you Brits like to romance. And all I want to do is suck.
In creating Dracula 2000, we had designed a lot of both visual effects sequences and then also practical effects. I think By and large, the practical effects especially are really successful. Gary Tunnicliffe, who did all the special effects makeup, that was the first film I worked on with Gary, and I've worked with Gary ever since, and I adore him because he is a guy who can do anything. And I think, that was incredibly valuable for us. Not only did Gary, make all the heads and all the teeth and do all the makeup and do the contacts and everything like that. He was the leech wrangler when we were shooting the real medicinal leeches in this. He made that great body of Dracula that then lunges up. He has a little cameo in Dracula 2000 as the helmsman of the Demeter, the one who's shackled to the Demeter with rats crawling all over him.
I saw him. I saw his face. Who?
The visual effects on this were a little more challenging because we were very ambitious in what we wanted. I think some of the visual effects worked out great, and some fell a little short from what we needed. There's one shot in particular that we not so lovingly referred to as the sushi wrap, which is where the graveyard Dracula wraps his coat around Mary and they disappear in a puff of smoke. That, to me, that shot is ridiculous. But it also was. It came in really late. They didn't have enough time. We spent so much time talking about how to make Dracula and Lucy be able to have zero gravity sex. That was meeting after meeting after meeting of how we were going to do it. At one point we were going to make this cast plexiglass invisible thing that they would lie on, and then we would levitate it, and it was like, oh, that seems really complicated. At the end of the day, the way they levitate is they are on a painted green seesaw, and they are literally standing up. They don't move. The seesaw is also on a turntable, so that sort of turns, and the camera goes back and forth, and then we just put them in the room. It was so much simpler than all the conversations we had about it. One of my favorite visual effects shots in the movie is the when the wolf leaps out at Simon and Mary, and Simon fires the silver spike at the wolf, and the wolf bursts into bats. That I thought was fantastic. The transformation that Dracula goes to when he becomes the wolf is just all editing. It's just, we ran the wolf down this corridor, and of course the blowing curtains were terrified the wolf. So it took a while for the wolf to be able to do it, and then we just had Jerry crouch down and pretend he was a wolf, and then we just flash cut them back and forth until it looks like Jerry's head is on the wolf's body. That's a persistence of vision thing. The other thing that Joel and I really wanted in the story was in the scene of the swamp. The reason he went to New Orleans was people like, oh, is that the whole Anne Rice thing? It's just like, no, we didn't even think about that. The New Orleans thing was, there's sort of the party debauchery atmosphere of New Orleans and Mardi Gras 2000 and everything like that. That we all thought was pretty cool. But the other reason was when the plane crashes in the swamp, when you then see Dracula attack Jerry Ryan, what you saw before that was this weird, you do that flyover. What we had done, a night thing, we scouted it, we went out, with alligators, and was that you see this, what looks like a man standing there with something writhing all over him. And you reveal as you get closer that it's Dracula covered in mosquitoes. And they're all drawing his blood. He's standing there naked in the swamp, covered in mosquitoes. And then all the mosquitoes fly off. And then throughout the rest of the movie, like when Selina's being interrogated by the cop and Dr. Seward, our version of Dr. Seward, the screamer, you see, the cop slap the mosquito on his face. And you see other people, the mosquitoes were everywhere. And the whole point of Dracula at the end, when he said, you know, you made the world in your image, I now remake it in mine, is that he has infected the entire city. He has done this flawlessly. He has won from the moment he landed. He has won. And I think I made the mistake of telling Dimension Films that that's what that meant. And they were like, oh, Dracula can't win? And it's like, what do you mean? That's the whole point. He is the hero, right? He is, even though he's a bad guy, he is the hero of our story. Let's let him win. We gave him reason to win. So the whole thing was, at the end, is the entire, you know, he makes Mary his queen, and the entire city is covered with vampires. It's vengeance. It was a vengeance against God, and to which he won. That was the original concept. And then that changed.
You cannot imagine what I've had to endure. I have borne the very wrath of God. Chosen to suffer like no man before.
Who are you?
It was my last sunset on this earth that made me who I am.
One of the most difficult sequences in the movie was the fight at the end, the final battle, as they often are, with Johnny Lee Miller battling Jennifer Esposito, which is a pretty interactive little battle inside this greenhouse that, of course, then smashes the greenhouse, and then they fly out of the greenhouse. At the same time, Dracula and Mary are fighting outside, and Dracula's just beating the crap out of her and kicking her and flying her in the air and throwing her here, there, and everywhere. And it was done across 3 different sets. Part of it was done in New Orleans, part of it was done on an interior set in Toronto, part of it was done on an exterior set that we actually had to shoot at night. All those pieces then had to go and had to be mapped out how that was going to work, and then Dracula lighting on fire was a different piece. But thinking back on it now, weirdly enough, the biggest sort of mentally challenging piece to shoot was the mirror trap that you see in the flashback, with Van Helsing trapping Dracula using a mirror. Because we actually made a set that was exactly the same. It was a set that had the cage in the middle and was the same on both sides, so you could pretend part of it was a mirror and part of it wasn't. It was so complicated to try and wrap your head around how the reflections worked, and when you were, is this shot in the reflection? Is this shot not in the reflection? And part of it was we were overthinking it. I remember we made a visual effect in one shot. It was like, this shot doesn't need to be a visual effect. We actually just shot this straight, and that would work because of the whole mirrored thing. But that was the most sort of mind fuck sequence, was the mirror sequence. Each sequence had its own challenges. Certainly the running and fighting in the graveyard in New Orleans was a challenge because a storm was swirling around us, and we kept being on the verge of having to shut down. Peter Powell had said we must all wear red, so the spirits, and be respectful of the spirits in the graveyard, so that they will know we are friendly and they will let us shoot here without a problem. The whole crew wore red except for the Japanese stunt crew. They didn't. They were like, we're not wearing red. And we didn't get shut down. We could work through the whole night. It was amazing.
Everything I am is yours.
Mary! Mary!
And all you are is mine.
My experience, certainly now 23, 24 years later, is that things will work out if you decide they will work out. If you decide you're going to make it work, he'll make it work. If you decide it's not going to work, it definitely won't. And there are unseen things, like in the scene where Jerry Butler bites Omar on the plane, every take you have to redo each other's makeup because Omar's makeup is very dark and gets on Jerry's face. Jerry's makeup is very light, gets all over Omar's face. And then and it's like, oh, I never even thought of that was going to be a thing. And sure enough, that's a thing. You know, we didn't finish our primary shoot of this film until after the Labor Day weekend in 2000. And we were coming out 22nd of December. We had so we flew back from New Orleans. I'm cutting with an old friend of mine, Peter Devaney Flanagan, who's an editor who we worked together on Mimic and Scream and stuff like that. They give us, I have a 3-day director's cut. You're supposed to have contractually 10 weeks. So we did it in 3 days. We tried to cobble something together that was somewhat presentable to show it to Wes. And then Wes worked with us for 2 days, and then we had to show it to 30 studio executives, which, needless to say, didn't go quite as well as we'd hoped. We had no visual effects. We hadn't even had any time to shape the scenes down. Scenes were too long. I remember their favorite scene in the whole film was the fight in the garage with Omar and Johnny Lee Miller. They loved that scene. Dimension Films used to have a thing they notoriously called the kill tape, which was a tape of kills from other movies that they would give directors. And here, you gotta watch the kill tape. I want you to make this kill like this. It's gotta look like this. So from all these other movies. And then their comment at the end is, there's one for the kill tape.
Never, ever fuck with an antiques dealer.
That was a challenge because we immediately started talking about shooting some additional material before we'd even had a chance to make the material that we had work. The debates back and forth about certain sequences, particularly the opening, the quote-unquote Hammer Films opening, the Mirror Gag opening. They're like, no, we want that cut out. We should just start present day. We're Dracula 2000. We don't want it to feel like a Hammer movie. And it was like, well, the whole point is it feels like a Hammer movie. That's the point. So, that was a challenge because we were trying to recut the film and get it into shape. At the same time, we were writing new scenes. Nathan Fillion's character was part of a reshoot. We actually shot his scene on Halloween of 2000. And we just, Joel and I were like, well, we need some scene to further explain, Mary and the family and Van Helsing and the relationship and what that is. And we came up with this idea. And we had already shot in that church. We'd shot in the church with Johnny and Justine for the scene that happens later when they go back there. The thing about Nathan Fillion, I had been a huge fan of, and Nathan had come in and read for Omar Epps' part, and his audition was amazing. And I think at the time he was doing Two Guys, a Girl, and a Pizza Joint, or whatever that show was. We went with the different actor, and then ultimately we went with Omar for that part. But Omar's performance, the direction I gave Omar, was based on Nathan's audition. Sorry, Omar.
If such a man, or thing, or whatever it is, has chosen you, then you've got to fight it. Do you understand me, Mary? You've got to fight back.
But what if I can't?
Then you'll have betrayed your faith in Christ.
But I will be with you forever.
But that, it always sort of like, well, how can we add this really sort of important character moment in this reshoot? And it was an old thing we used to always say about Dimension Films is that they would develop their scripts in post. While you were editing, they would come up with new ideas and new this and new that. And they would, often go 30% over budget. We I think, had budgeted a lot for knowing how quickly and how much the script had changed while we were getting into shooting, knowing we were going to come back. We kept the sets were still standing and everything like that, so we could go back and shoot more. The scene with Selena and Jerry and Dr. Seward and the the detective was always a scene that was left over from the very first draft, because everybody just liked the scene, but it never really had a home in the movie, and it kept moving around of where it would go, because it could go in lots of different places. So that was, you know, once it was cut, it is what it is. It never changed. It just traveled within the body of the film. From somewhere after, you know, Selena getting caught, somewhere her showing up as a bride, that scene was constantly on the move.
You haven't been feeding her. Dignity, Doctor.
I've often said that this is a movie that we had a better idea than we were allowed to write. We wrote a better script than we had time to shoot. We cut the best movie we could in the time allowed, and then we released it. And just sort of like, you know, passed out, because it was just an insane race to get done and hit that date. We should have had another 3 or 4 months of post. Van Helsing's death scene, which is not in the movie. We shot this whole huge death scene for Chris and Justine. When she comes upstairs and comes in the room, before she pulls back the sheet and discovers he's under the bed, there was actually a whole other scene that they decided they didn't want, because they felt Van Helsing's story, once he's thrown in the mirror, is over. We just want to spend time with the younger cast. We didn't have time to cut it down the way it should be. It had this great effect shot at the end where all in one, Van Helsing goes from being his sort of decaying self to literally rotting and fading away as his head turns. And Chris was like, you know, my death scene was contractual. He was, how could you cut me out? He wrote this beautiful letter. I was so angry about his death scene being cut out. He called me on the phone. He called Bob on the phone. He called everybody. A couple other things in post-production that were great is that we had this amazing score by Marco Beltrami. And Marco had done the Scream movies, he'd done Mimic. I remember being told by Dimension is, we don't want the score to be too big, have it be really subtle. So we had an 80-piece orchestra and this Arabic singer and all this other stuff. And Gladiator had come out while we were shooting, and we were all, yeah, we want to score like that. Really subtle. So the score is huge, and I think Marco did a great, amazing job with that. Our sound job, all the sound effects and sound design work were done by Skywalker Sound. It was mixed by Gary Rizzo and Chris Boyes, both of which have won Academy Awards. And the sound was done by Steve Bodeker did the sound design, and Frank Ulner, who since sadly passed away, and Gwen Whittle did all the dialogue and ADR and everything like that. And they did an incredible job. Of all the films I've done, I think this is the best sound mix, including the ones I've edited. I think the sound is far and away amazing. Like if you get a chance to listen to this in 5.1, it is a really rich, beautiful soundscape that was created to heighten the experience of watching the film. There are things about it that haunt me, as if only we coulda, if only we shoulda sort of thing. Mistakes that I made, mistakes I know the studio made. But watching this 4K release of it, I sort of get why there is a part of the audience that really loves this film, and why it has resonated. And I think because I was so deep in the forest of Dracula 2000 for so many years, and pulling my hair out, I didn't appreciate what they saw, not knowing anything that happened in the process of making it, and just seeing it for what it is. Sure, there's some goofy dialogue that I wish we'd cut out, but it has a scope and a scale, and it rightly or wrongly takes itself pretty seriously and makes a big swing with its mythology and the mythology of Dracula, and adds something that a lot of Dracula movies don't do, and which is something original and different. And I was very proud of that, and proud of the actors in it, and just to know what Johnny Lee Miller did to what we did to his character before he got there, and how he made that character still work. How Christopher Plummer, just lent so much gravity to it. How Jerry Butler walking in, just completely embodied Dracula and threw on the cloak of movie star with absolute effortless energy. I'm very grateful that Joel and I had this opportunity to make this film.
I am now the keeper of what remains. If the soul of Dracula still flickers in his ashes, I will keep it forever contained. For the first time in my life, I know who I am and where my future lies. I am Mary Van Helsing. I am my father's daughter, and nothing can ever take that away.